Please excuse me while I unpack this for a moment. Anyone who knows me knows that I'm a bit of a pack rat. And even on the TED stage, that's going to be the case. Physical abuse. Emotional abuse. Sexual abuse. Physical neglect. Emotional neglect. Witness to violence. An incarcerated relative. Exposure to substance abuse. Mental illness in the home, and divorce. These are the 10 adverse childhood experiences that researchers have linked to every major chronic illness and social issue in the United States. Sit with that for a moment. Every major chronic illness and social issue in our country is linked to these rocks. By the time I entered high school, I had collected 7 of these 10 rocks. Rocks can be grounding or heavy. How do we support children in our community who carry this heaviness to be productive and successful citizens? It's a big question, right? Well, I'm here today to tell you about a way that I think we can do it. Restorative practices in schools has the power to transform communities. 14 years ago, when my husband and I first welcomed our foster daughter into our home, I set out on a mission to find ways that I could support students who come through my door every day with these invisible life backpacks so full of pain, suffering, and neglect. I could relate to their pain. It was the silent language I spoke as a child. I even named the pain. I called it my sad ball. As a teacher, it's like I have special X-ray glasses that can see these heavy backpacks. I wanted to find ways that we could hold them to high expectations academically while also supporting them to thrive. Not an easy feat. I get asked a lot, how did I survive over the years, like my whole life? How did I survive the heaviness of these rocks? And I pondered and questioned that for a very long time and wasn't sure. And in fact, sometimes I was even kind of annoyed that people were asking me because I'm here, I survived, what does it matter? And it almost seemed like they were surprised that I didn't fail. I look back now as an adult with the work that I do, and I think it's because they wanted to bottle it and give it to all the kids that they knew that needed it. And over the years, when I was pondering that question, I too wanted to find out what is the secret sauce and how do I spread it to every student who walks through my classroom who needs it. And the answer is resilience. Sheer perseverance. Around the same time that I was asking that question and pondering my own healing journey, which I don't want you to think was easy, because it wasn't. The whole idea of pull yourself up from your bootstraps is a broken dream for people who carry these rocks. It's a long and hard journey, and it takes a village. And you are that village. Carol Dweck was conducting one of the most groundbreaking studies on the topic. We now know through her 30-year longitudinal study that children and adolescents who believe that they can develop their intelligence are more successful in life. There's hope for healing with resilience. But how do we foster and create an environment that supports that for all children? We can't leave any of them behind. You might have noticed in the last 10 years a lot of news coverage about disrupted learning in America. Overturned desks, pencils thrown, classrooms destroyed, students in crisis, and teachers. And I know that there's some of you out there today. And I don't think that there's a clear answer for what's going on and what's been going on. And there's been a lot of talk about it, about what we can do about it, a lot. I do know that there was some interesting things happening around the time that I noticed more of my colleagues who were in this room dealing with these issues. In 2008, we went through one of the worst economic downturns in many of our lifetimes. With a recession comes stress, which leads to substance abuse issues. Substance abuse leads to more domestic violence incidents, which leads to more child witness to violence, neglect, and other forms of abuse. Within all of this, mental health services were either being cut or remaining grossly inadequate to serve the needs of children and families in most communities. Do you think that the community and parents would be okay with a more restorative approach? Yes. Take this situation, for example. Meet Max and Xavier, two middle school boys. In my classroom one year in 6th grade, they were messing around like normal 6th graders. They had one of those, Max brought in one of those cold compresses that you activate by squeezing, squishing it around. And they were throwing it at each other, of course, when my back was turned, and one of them missed and hit the wall. You can imagine what their faces were like. What's she gonna do? I have two choices of how I can deal with this situation. So the compress actually hit a wall and splattered all over a supply shelf and a bookshelf, so you can imagine the mess. So there's two ways I can handle this situation at my school. I can choose a traditional disciplinary approach, call the office, write a referral, send them out of class. The most common consequences for that approach are detention, in-school or out-of-school suspension, or ultimately expulsion. Or I can choose a restorative approach, where they would have to face the situation directly, co-create a solution with the parties involved, and then have to repair the damage to the relationship, the trust, and in this case, the bookshelf and the carpet. I chose the latter approach, and here's what happened. These boys came up at their lunch break, involuntarily, the first time, of course, and they brainstormed what they needed to do, and clearly they needed to clean up the mess, and they did that. But then on their own, for 5 days, on their own, they would come into my classroom, and every day they would check that floor and they would check that bookshelf, and if there was one speck of that residue left from the compress, they'd go and ask to get the cleaning kit out. They'd put their rubber gloves on because I told them that chemical substance could hurt somebody if they put it in their mouth. I get kind of dramatic sometimes, anybody who knows me, just a little bit. And they cleaned it up. And to the point where I had to tell them, they were like, what else can we do? Can I come up at lunch? Do you think you need that done? You need that done? I'm like, dear Lord, I want to go back with my friends and eat some lunch with my friends again. I mean, it's amazing to me how well the restorative approach works. That is the restorative approach. Would it surprise you? So within all of this structure that I was talking about with before, of 2008. We're going to go back. I want you to remember all of the things I said that were happening. And then there's something that happened in classrooms as well, as stress was increasing at home with the recession and everything that led for that for families. And we all were there. We went through it. We know what it was like. Everyone was affected by it. There was also new higher benchmarks for expectations in schools that were happening. And those benchmarks are good. We want our kids to succeed. But add that in to what's going on already, and it was a perfect storm. This was the same time that the smartphone revolution was happening, so everyone had a screen in their hand, including children who were sometimes being monitored more by technology than by adult supervision. We need to build a better system. And we can. And here's why. The current system that we have is funneling children with these heavy life backpacks into prison. And in my years of teaching, I have seen this happen more than I want to tell you about. And we are incarcerating more young people than in any other developed country in the world. Any other developed country in the world. And not by a small margin, by a lot. This school-to-prison pipeline has to be broken. But how? Through restorative practices. That's how. So, let's take a step back. Sorry, that's a little sombering. But important information to know. We need to know the pond that we swim in, and sometimes we don't know the pond we swim in. Let's look at the traditional ways that we've dealt with challenging behaviors in the public school system in America. If a child doesn't read, we teach. If a child doesn't swim, we teach. If a child doesn't multiply, we teach. If a child doesn't know how to drive, we teach. If a child doesn't know how to behave, we teach, punish. Why can't we finish the last sentence as automatically as we do the others? Would it surprise you if I told you that the majority of the children that we are incarcerating, young people, children, in my mind, they're children, because when you see them when they're in kindergarten and you watch them grow up, they're still those babies. You know how you feel about your own children, right? They are minorities. It shouldn't surprise you. Would it surprise you if I told you that most of them grow up in poverty? And this starts in the school system with the punitive approach to discipline, where we are punishing them instead of teaching them the skills they need. We know that adults who have higher developed social emotional skills and more advanced social and emotional learning are more successful in life. We need a system that teaches children these skills systematically and comprehensively. We need a system that stops punishing kids in crisis. We need a system that supports them to heal, holds them accountable, and while also building healthy relationships with their peers and each other. There's a saying at the school where I currently teach: people do well if they can. People do well if they can. I propose we shift our thinking to view behavior as any other skill in life that we need to be successful. What would it look like if we taught the skills to be successful when there was a challenging behavior instead of punishing with shame and blame? All the traditional disciplinary approaches, which sometimes school districts have policies that they can't get around, and they have to choose some of those depending on what the situation is. All of those choices push kids out of school. So what does it teach them? It teaches them that they don't belong, and then they start to believe it. As a teacher, when a child comes back into my classroom after being suspended, it takes me at least a month sometimes to build that relationship again. It's working against what we want. We can build. I know we can do it. I believe in the power of our community. I truly do, or I wouldn't be on this stage, because this is terrifying. Thank you. Aw. And here's how you can help right now in a very small way. The next time you find yourself in a conflict, or you're helping your child through a conflict, I want you to use these 5 questions. What happened from your perspective? Who was affected by it? What do you remember thinking or feeling at the time? What can be done to make it right? And what do you need to move forward? The most important part of this whole process, please remember this, the most important part is that both parties have a chance to share and co-create in the solution. And I know that takes more time, but it works, and it's worth it. If I reflect on my own life backpack and think about all the rocks that I carry every day that have now become the pride of my life, of my survival, one of the things that I think of is that if it weren't for my friends, my teachers, and my friends' parents, I would not have survived my situation the way that I did. They say it only takes one person to build resilience in a child. I invite you to be that one person for one child in our community. And if you happen to be, I wish I could see because I would make eye contact with you. If you happen to be a person who has a position of influence in any way in our community, where you could shift policy in either the school systems or in the justice system or in any other system that works with children, I invite you to join me in creating a community that will help all children thrive. Thank you so much. Thank you.